My father was buried. Not at home. Not in a lawyer's office. But at my father's funeral. The church in Madison was quiet in that heavy way grief brings, the kind where even footsteps sound too loud. White lilies filled the air with a scent so strong it made my head ache. My father's casket sat at the front, polished and closed, the final proof that the one person who had always protected me was gone. I was still shaking from signing the guest book, from hugging relatives, from hearing people tell me how good a man my father had been. Then my husband, Evan Holloway, walked toward me with a man in a dark suit. "Rachel," Evan said softly, like he was doing me a favor, "this is my attorney. We need you to sign something." I remember looking at the folder in his hands and thinking how unreal it felt, like this was happening to someone else. "Right here," I whispered, "at my father's funeral." Evan leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough for it to sound kind, but loud enough for others to hear. "Your dad would want you to do the right thing. He would want honesty. He would want us to move on peacefully." The room went still. My aunt froze a few steps away. One of my father's co-workers stared openly. Everyone was watching me now. I looked down at the papers, divorce documents, his name as the petitioner, mine as the respondent, legal language about irreconcilable differences and asset division. I felt small, cornered, exposed. I had lost my father less than 6 hours earlier. I was exhausted, numb, surrounded by people who expected me to behave, to be polite, to not cause a scene. So I did exactly what Evan thought I would do. I picked up the pen. "Okay," I said quietly, "I'll sign." What Evan did not know was this. 2 hours earlier in a law office downtown, I had already signed something else. And that was the moment his life quietly fell apart. 3 days before my father's funeral, my life looked ordinary from the outside. I had been married to Evan Holloway for 8 years. We lived in a modest rental house on the east side of Madison, the kind with thin walls and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of old coffee. Nothing fancy, nothing permanent. I worked full-time at a regional hospital, handling medical billing and insurance claims. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Every month my paycheck covered the rent, groceries, utilities, car insurance, and whatever Evan needed for his latest idea. Evan, on the other hand, was always on the edge of something big. He never said unemployed. He said building. He said networking. He said preparing investor decks and waiting on the right opportunity. For years I believed him, or maybe I wanted to. Most mornings I woke up before sunrise to get ready for work while Evan slept in. He claimed his calls ran late into the night. Sometimes he came home after midnight. Sometimes he didn't come home at all and blamed hotel Wi-Fi or crashing at a friend's place. When money got tight, Evan always had an explanation. "Once the funding comes through, this won't matter. You just don't see the bigger picture yet. You have to trust me." I trusted him because that's what wives are taught to do. I packed my own lunches to save money. I skipped new clothes. I told myself sacrifice was temporary and love meant patience. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. Bills I never remembered opening. Packages that arrived and disappeared. An expensive cologne Evan said was too special for everyday use. But when you are busy surviving, you don't question patterns, you normalize them. I thought my marriage was struggling because life was hard. I didn't realize it was struggling because I was married to someone who saw me as a resource, not a partner. And I had no idea how close everything was to collapsing. The first real crack appeared on a Monday afternoon at work. I was sitting in my cubicle at the hospital, scrolling through insurance claims, when I opened my personal email to check a confirmation code for a patient file. That was when I saw a subject line I did not recognize. Capital Ridge Platinum Card Statement. I stared at the screen, confused. I had never applied for a platinum card. I'd barely used credit at all. I clicked it, expecting spam. It was not spam. The statement showed a balance of $8,400. Charges from upscale restaurants, a downtown hotel, a jewelry store I had never been inside. All in my name. My hands went cold. I checked the account details again, hoping I had misread something. But the information was correct. My full name, my address, my social security number. I locked myself in my car during lunch and called the number on the statement. The customer service agent was calm, almost bored. According to her records, the account had been opened 6 months earlier in person at a local branch. The application included my signature and correct answers to all security questions. My mother's maiden name. The city where I was born. The name of my childhood dog. Only 2 people knew all of that. Me and my husband. I told her I had never opened the account. She explained the next steps slowly, carefully. To dispute the charges, I would need to file a police report for identity theft. I sat there gripping my steering wheel, watching hospital staff walk past my car, laughing, carrying coffee, living normal lives. Something inside me shifted. This was not carelessness. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a mistake. This was betrayal wearing a very calm face. And I was still married to the man who had done it. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was still sitting in my car. It was a text from my father. Breakfast tomorrow, 7 a.m., Pete's Diner. We need to talk about something important. I frowned at the screen. Breakfast with my dad was usually Saturdays. It was our tradition. Tomorrow was Tuesday, and important was not a word my father used lightly. I typed back, "Is everything okay?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Everything's fine. Just don't tell Evan. I'll explain in person." That part made my stomach tighten. My father, Thomas Reed, was 72 years old and still working as a union electrician. He fixed wiring in old buildings, climbed ladders he had no business climbing anymore, and refused to retire because, as he liked to say, sitting still was how people died. After my mother passed away when I was 16, he became my anchor. Quiet, practical, steady. He never interfered in my marriage, never criticized Evan directly, but I knew he worried. That night, Evan came home late again. I told him I had breakfast plans with my dad in the morning. He barely looked up from his phone. "That's fine," he said. "I've got meetings anyway." The next morning, Pete's Diner smelled like burnt coffee and buttered toast. The same red vinyl booths. The same waitress who had known me since high school. My father was already seated when I arrived. He looked tired, not sick, just heavier somehow. We ordered. Then he slid a business card across the table toward me. Margaret Collins, estate attorney. I stared at it. "Dad, what is this?" He took a breath, slow and measured. "I've been putting things off. Paperwork, planning, I don't want to anymore." I tried to laugh it off. "You're not dying." He met my eyes. "No, but I'm not stupid either." Then he said the words that stayed with me. "Rachel, trust me, and whatever happens next, remember this. I have always been protecting you." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. I just knew my father was afraid, and that he was moving faster than I had ever seen him move before. Margaret Collins's office was 10 minutes from the hospital and a world away from my normal life. Dark wood furniture, tall shelves filled with law books, the kind of quiet that made you lower your voice without realizing it. Margaret was in her mid-50s, sharp-eyed, calm, and direct. She closed the conference room door and did not waste time with small talk. "Your father called me last night," she said. "He told me the situation was urgent." My chest tightened. "Is my dad sick?" She shook her head. "Not in the way you mean, but he is concerned. Very concerned." She opened a thick folder and began laying documents across the table. Property deeds. Bank statements. Trust paperwork. "Rachel," she said gently, "your father owns 10 rental properties across 3 counties. He has been acquiring them quietly for more than 30 years. I stared at her. "That's not possible. My dad is an electrician." "Yes," she said, "and a very disciplined one. He invested consistently, lived modestly, never took on unnecessary debt." She explained slowly, using plain language. The properties generated steady income. They were fully paid off. They were intentionally kept out of sight. Then she showed me the trust documents. "Your father created an irrevocable trust naming you as the sole beneficiary. Everything transfers directly to you. The trust specifically excludes any spousal claims regardless of marital status." I struggled to breathe. "Why now?" I asked. "Why this week?" Margaret folded her hands. "Because your father believes your husband is going to make a move. Soon, and he wants you protected before that happens. She slid a final document toward me. These papers transfer control immediately. Once signed, there is no delay, no probate exposure, no opportunity for anyone to interfere. I thought about the credit card, the lies, the way Evan avoided eye contact when I asked direct questions. My hand shook as I picked up the pen. I signed. Margaret nodded once. Good. Then her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at the screen and her expression changed. Rachel, she said quietly, I need to tell you something. Your father was admitted to the hospital early this morning. Massive heart attack. They did everything they could. The room seemed to tilt. I did not cry, not yet. I had just signed documents that changed my entire future. And my father was already gone. Everything he had done in the last 24 hours suddenly made sense. He knew. And he moved fast because he was running out of time. I left Margaret Collins's office in a haze. The world outside looked exactly the same. Cars moved. People crossed the street. A coffee shop buzzed on the corner. It felt wrong that everything kept going when my father had just stopped. I drove straight to the hospital. They took me to a small room with beige walls and uncomfortable chairs. A doctor explained what happened in careful professional sentences. Massive heart attack, sudden, no pain, no warning signs anyone could have acted on. I nodded like I understood even though nothing made sense. My father had been eating eggs and toast with me less than 2 hours earlier. He had smiled. He had warned me. He had protected me. And now he was gone. I signed the release forms with the same hand that had signed trust documents that morning. My name looked unfamiliar on the page, like it belonged to someone else. There was no time to sit with the grief. Calls had to be made. Arrangements had to be handled. The funeral director needed decisions I did not feel qualified to make. Flowers or donations. Open casket or closed. Thursday or Friday service. I chose everything quickly because standing still hurt more. That night, I went back to the rental house I shared with Evan. He was not there. I stood in the kitchen staring at the counter where unpaid bills were stacked. Past due notices, final warnings, things Evan had promised to handle. I did not cry then either. I felt empty, hollow, like something essential had been removed and replaced with nothing. By morning, my father would be in a casket. By afternoon, people would be shaking my hand and telling me how sorry they were. And somewhere inside all of that, my husband was already planning his next move. What he did not know was that my father had already beaten him to it. The clock had started. And every second that passed was working against Evan, not me. The day of my father's funeral arrived too quickly. The church filled slowly with people I barely recognized at first, men my father had worked with, neighbors, old friends, people who had known him in ways I never fully understood until that moment. They shook my hand, hugged me gently, told me how much my father had helped them over the years, how dependable he was, how kind, how he always showed up. I stood beside the casket, dressed in black, moving on instinct alone. Evan arrived 10 minutes before the service started. He wore a new suit, dark, perfectly pressed, expensive. I noticed it immediately because I knew he had never had the money for it. He kissed my cheek like a performance, asked if I was okay, did not ask about the arrangements, did not mention my father. During the service, he kept checking his phone. When the final hymn ended, people began moving toward the reception hall downstairs. Casseroles, coffee, folding tables, the kind of gathering my father would have preferred. Simple, practical. That was when Evan touched my elbow. "Can we talk for a minute?" he said. A man stood beside him, late 40s, confident posture, leather folder tucked under his arm. "This is my attorney," Evan said calmly, "Derek Lawson." I felt my stomach drop. He guided me into a small classroom off the main hallway. Children's drawings lined the walls, crayons taped to construction paper, bright colors that did not belong in a moment like this. Derek closed the door. "Mrs. Holloway," he began, "I represent your husband in a personal legal matter. Given the circumstances and the pending estate issues, we felt it was appropriate to handle this today." He laid the papers on a child-sized table. "Divorce documents." I stared at them, unable to speak. "You are serving me divorce papers at my father's funeral," I finally said. Evan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Rachel, I know this is hard, but your dad would want you to do the right thing. He was practical. He would not want a drawn-out fight." Through the small window in the door, I could see faces gathering. My aunt, one of my father's co-workers, people noticing something was wrong. "If you sign today," Evan continued, "we keep this simple, uncontested, clean, no drama. We split everything fairly and move on. And if I don't, I don't." Derek answered that one. "Then it becomes complicated, expensive, assets get frozen, lawyers get involved. Your father's estate gets tied up for years." They were using my grief as leverage. They were counting on my exhaustion, my shock, my need to disappear rather than fight in public. I thought of the law office that morning, of my father's voice, of the papers already signed. My hands were shaking when I picked up the pen. "Okay," I said quietly, "where do I sign?" Relief crossed Evan's face before he could hide it. I signed every page, and the trap closed without a sound. Evan left the classroom lighter than he entered it. I could see it in his shoulders, in the way he straightened his tie, in the small satisfied breath he took as we walked back into the reception hall. To him this was over, a necessary inconvenience handled efficiently. He squeezed my hand once, like a manager congratulating an employee for being cooperative. "You did the right thing," he said. "This will be better for both of us." Then he released my hand and went straight to his friends. I watched from across the room as he laughed quietly, checked his phone, nodded to messages I could not see. He looked calm, confident, free. He stayed less than an hour. Long enough to be seen, long enough to perform grief, long enough to make sure the papers were signed. Before he left, he leaned in and kissed my forehead. "I'll call you later," he said. "We should talk about next steps, the estate, the assets. We'll need to be organized." Assets. That word followed me for the rest of the afternoon. I stayed until the last guest left. I helped stack chairs. I wiped tables. I accepted hugs from people who loved my father and meant well. No one asked where Evan was. No one asked why my eyes looked empty. That night, I did not go home. I checked into a small hotel near the interstate under my maiden name, paid cash, turned my phone face down on the nightstand. When I finally looked at it, there were 7 missed calls from Evan. 2 voicemails. The first was calm. "Call me when you're ready. We need to talk logistics." The second was sharper. "Rachel, this doesn't have to get messy. Call me back." I stared at the ceiling and felt nothing. Evan believed the hardest part was over. He believed I had folded. He believed he had won. By the next afternoon, he would learn how wrong he was. The call came the next morning while I was sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at nothing. It was Margaret Collins. I answered without saying hello. "They've filed," she said. "Exactly as we expected." My chest tightened anyway. "Filed what?" "Your husband's attorney submitted the divorce petition first thing this morning. Uncontested. He is requesting immediate disclosure of marital assets, including anything related to your father's estate." There it was, the move Evan thought would secure his future. Margaret's voice remained calm. "His attorney called my office about 20 minutes ago. He was very confident." "What did he say?" "He asked for full documentation on all properties formerly owned by Thomas Reed. He said, and I quote, that inheritances received during marriage are subject to division." I closed my eyes. "And what did you say?" I told him the truth. She paused just long enough for it to land. I told him those properties are not marital assets. They are held in an irrevocable trust established prior to your father's death. Your husband has no legal claim to the income, the properties, or the appreciation. None. There was silence on the line. Then Margaret added, almost gently. I could hear him breathing. He didn't say anything for several seconds. Then he asked me to repeat myself. "Did he argue?" "Yes, he accused me of backdating documents, of manipulating your father, of committing fraud. And I told him the trust was notarized, witnessed, recorded, and filed before your father passed away." My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed steady. What happened after that? He ended the call abruptly. Margaret exhaled. Rachel, this is the moment where things change. He now understands that he has nothing to leverage. No money, no control, no access. I stared at the plain hotel carpet beneath my feet. And Evan. Margaret did not hesitate. Evan is panicking. When people like him lose the illusion of control, they don't go quietly. She was right. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Evan. I didn't answer. For the first time in years, his urgency was no longer my problem. The power had shifted, and he could feel it slipping through his fingers. Evan called 12 times that day. I did not answer any of them. The messages shifted quickly. Confusion turned into anger. Anger turned into bargaining. This doesn't make sense. Your lawyer is lying to you. We can fix this if you just talk to me. By late afternoon, the tone changed again. Rachel, please, we don't need to do this the hard way. I listened to the last voicemail once, then deleted it. Margaret was right. When control disappears, panic fills the space it leaves behind. That evening, I met Margaret in her office. She had already prepared everything. Timelines, documentation, copies of the credit card statements I had discovered, records showing accounts opened in my name without my consent. We're not doing anything aggressive, she said. We're simply responding to facts. That mattered to me. I was not trying to punish Evan. I was not trying to humiliate him. I was not seeking revenge. I was telling the truth. Margaret explained the next steps clearly. The fraudulent accounts would be reported. The divorce would proceed without asset division. Any attempt by Evan to interfere with the trust would be blocked immediately. He created this situation himself, she said. You're just no longer protecting him from it. That sentence stayed with me. For years I had softened consequences, covered gaps, made excuses, absorbed stress so Evan didn't have to. I thought that was love. Now I understood what it really was. Protection without accountability is not love. It is erasure. Evan texted one final message that night. You're really going to do this? I didn't reply. Not because I was being cold. Not because I was trying to hurt him. But because for the first time I was choosing not to disappear so someone else could feel powerful. What followed was not revenge. It was consequence. And there is a difference. In the quiet that followed, my father's presence became louder than it had ever been. I spent the next few days going through his things slowly, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand the man I had just lost, the man who had moved so carefully, so deliberately in his final days. My father did not leave me instructions about money. He left me examples. Every folder in his desk was labeled, every receipt filed, every decision documented. He didn't trust hope. He trusted preparation. Margaret explained it to me one afternoon in a way that finally made sense. Your father didn't try to fight your husband. He didn't argue. He didn't warn him. He outplanned him. That was who my father was. He believed security was built quietly, over time. That love meant protection, not control. That the best defense wasn't confrontation but structure. I found a note he had written months earlier tucked inside a folder of property records. Make it simple, make it clean, don't leave her exposed. He had never raised his voice about Evan, never demanded I leave, never told me what to do with my marriage. He just made sure that when the truth surfaced I wouldn't be destroyed by it. That was the inheritance. Not the properties. And not the income. Not the numbers on paper. It was the freedom to choose without fear. Evan thought he was taking advantage of my grief. What he didn't understand was that my father had spent decades teaching me, without words, how to survive moments exactly like this. He didn't leave me anger. He didn't leave me revenge. He left me leverage, clarity, and a way forward. And once I saw that clearly, there was no going back. The divorce was finalized quietly a few weeks later. No courtroom drama, no long arguments, no public statements. Evan walked away with exactly what he had earned. Nothing. I stayed in the hotel for a while after everything ended, Not because I was hiding, but because I needed space to understand who I was without constantly managing someone else's chaos. Grief doesn't disappear when justice arrives, it just becomes clearer. I missed my father every day. I missed his steady voice, his practical advice, his ability to see danger before it arrived. But I also felt something new growing underneath the sadness. Strength. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind that comes from knowing you can stand on your own without apologizing for it. Here is what I learned. Love should never require you to be blind. Marriage should never require you to be powerless. And grief should never be used as leverage. If someone pressures you to sign something when you are vulnerable, stop. If someone controls the money but avoids responsibility, pay attention. If something feels wrong, it usually is. My father did not teach me how to fight. He taught me how to prepare. And that made all the difference. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Subscribe to The Art of Revenge for more stories about clarity, boundaries, and quiet justice. Some endings are not about destruction.